The dust from the stagecoach had barely settled when Emma Hartley stepped down onto the wooden planks of Copper Creek, Wyoming territory. Her feet screaming in protest with every step, she took across the platform of the stage depot on that sweltering afternoon in July of 1876. She had walked the last 40 miles after the stage had broken an axle outside of Laramie, and the driver had refused to wait for repairs, insisting the passengers either wait for the next coach in 3 days or make their own way forward. Emma had no time to wait. Her future husband, a rancher named Gerald Pritchard, expected her arrival that week, and she had already delayed her journey twice due to lack of funds. The shoes she wore, simple leather boots that had cost her nearly a month's wages back in Boston, had worn through at the heels, and her stockings were more whole than fabric. Every step she had taken across the prairie had been agony, but she had pushed forward, determination driving her more than hope. The other passengers had ridden in a farmer's wagon that had happened along, but there had been no room for Emma and her trunk. She had strapped what she could to her back and left the trunk with promises it would be delivered later, then set out on foot, following the stage road through the grasslands and rocky outcroppings that characterized this harsh and beautiful territory. Her feet had blistered, then bled, then finally calloused into something tougher than they had ever been during her years working in the textile mill back east. Now, standing in Copper Creek, she looked nothing like the hopeful mail-order bride whose photograph had been sent to Mr. Pritchard 3 months earlier. Her dress was covered in dust, her face sunburned despite the bonnet she wore, and her hands were scraped raw from catching herself during several falls. She carried herself with as much dignity as she could muster, but inside, Emma felt her confidence crumbling. What would Mr. Pritchard think when he saw her like this? Would he even want her anymore? She scanned the street, looking for anyone who might be waiting for a mail-order bride from Boston. The town was smaller than she had imagined, consisting of a main street with perhaps 20 buildings, including a general store, a saloon, a church, and what appeared to be a hotel. Men in dusty clothing moved along the wooden sidewalks, and a few women in simple dresses hurried about their business. Everyone seemed to have purpose except Emma, who stood alone with her small bag, trying not to limp. A tall man emerged from the shadow of the livery stable across the street. He wore typical cowboy attire, dusty denim trousers, a faded blue shirt, a leather vest, and a wide-brimmed hat that shadowed his face. He moved with the easy confidence of someone who belonged to this land, his boots striking the ground with assured steps. Emma watched him approach, hoping he might be able to direct her to the Pritchard ranch. When he came closer, she could see his face more clearly. He appeared to be in his late 20s, with sun-bronzed skin, strong features, and eyes the color of storm clouds that seemed to take in everything at once. His jaw was shadowed with stubble, and there was a hardness to his expression that spoke of a difficult life, but his eyes held something else, something almost gentle when they settled on her. "You are Emma Hartley?" he asked, his voice deep and rough like gravel but not unkind. "I am," she replied, straightening her spine despite the exhaustion that made her bones ache. "Are you here on behalf of Mr. Pritchard?" The man's expression shifted, becoming more guarded. He removed his hat, revealing dark hair that curled slightly at his collar. "I am Caleb Donovan. I work the spread next to Pritchard's place. I have some news about Gerald Pritchard, and it is not the kind that should be delivered standing in the street. Would you come with me to the hotel? You look like you could use a meal and a chair." Emma's heart began to pound with an emotion somewhere between dread and relief. Something had happened. She could see it in the way Caleb Donovan held himself, in the sympathy that flickered across his hard features. Part of her wanted to demand he tell her immediately, but the sensible part, the part that had kept her alive during the long walk from the broken stagecoach, told her to accept his offer. "Very well," she said quietly. Caleb gestured toward the hotel, a two-story building with a painted sign that read Copper Creek Hotel and Boarding House. He walked slowly, and Emma realized with a flush of embarrassment that he was matching his pace to her limping gait. She tried to walk more normally, but pain shot through her feet with each step, making it impossible to hide her condition. Inside the hotel, the air was cooler and smelled of coffee and fresh bread. A woman behind the desk looked up, her round face breaking into a smile when she saw Caleb. "Afternoon, Caleb. What brings you to town?" "Afternoon, Mrs. Fletcher. This is Miss Emma Hartley. She has traveled a long way and needs a room, a meal, and some privacy for a difficult conversation." Mrs. Fletcher's expression shifted to concern, but she was professional enough not to pry. "Of course, room 4 is available. I will bring up some stew and fresh bread. Would you like coffee or tea, dear?" "Tea, please," Emma said, her voice barely above a whisper. The kindness in the woman's eyes made her want to cry, but she held herself together through sheer force of will. Caleb carried Emma's bag up the narrow stairs to the second floor, where room 4 turned out to be a simple but clean space with a bed, a washstand, a small table, and 2 chairs positioned near the window. He set her bag down and waited for her to enter before following, leaving the door open for propriety's sake. "Please, sit down," he said, pulling out one of the chairs for her. Emma sank into it gratefully, trying not to wince as the pressure came off her damaged feet. Caleb took the other chair, turning it so he faced her. He held his hat in his hands, turning it slowly as he gathered his words. "Miss Hartley, Gerald Pritchard died 4 days ago. His horse spooked during a storm and threw him. He hit his head on a rock and never woke up. We buried him yesterday on his property as he would have wanted." The words hung in the air between them. Emma stared at Caleb, trying to process what he had just told her. Gerald Pritchard was dead. The man she had agreed to marry, the man who represented her hope for a new life, was gone before she had even met him. She had never loved him, had only known him through letters, but he had seemed kind and decent, and she had been prepared to build a life with him. "I see," she finally said, her voice remarkably steady. "Thank you for telling me." Caleb studied her face, perhaps surprised by her composure. "Did you have no telegram warning you?" "I sent word to the stage office in Laramie. The stage broke down outside of Laramie," Emma explained. "I walked from there. I never received any message." His eyes widened slightly. "You walked 40 miles? "I had no choice. I have no money for a return ticket and I could not afford to wait for the next coach. I thought my future was waiting here." She gestured vaguely toward the window, toward the town beyond. "Now I find myself in a strange place with no prospects and nowhere to go." Before Caleb could respond, Mrs. Fletcher arrived with a tray bearing a large bowl of hearty beef stew, thick slices of bread with butter, and a pot of tea with 2 cups. She set it on the table, gave Emma a motherly pat on the shoulder and withdrew, closing the door halfway as she left. "Eat," Caleb said gently. "We can talk after you have had some food." Emma realized she was ravenously hungry. She had eaten nothing but the dried biscuits in her bag for 2 days. She picked up the spoon and began to eat, trying to maintain some semblance of table manners despite her hunger. The stew was delicious, rich and filling, and the bread was still warm. Caleb poured tea for both of them and sat quietly, giving her time. When she had eaten enough to take the edge off her hunger, Emma set down her spoon and met Caleb's gaze. "I appreciate your kindness, Mr. Donovan, but I must face facts. I need to find work immediately or I will be destitute within days. Do you know if there are any positions available in Copper Creek?" "I can sew, I can cook adequately, and I am strong despite my current appearance." Caleb was quiet for a long moment, his gray eyes thoughtful. "There is not much opportunity in a town this size. Mrs. Fletcher might need help here at the hotel, or the general store might take someone on, but those positions are already filled by local women who depend on that work to feed their families. I would not want to see you take bread from their mouths, and I do not think you would want that either." Emma felt despair rising in her chest but pushed it down. She had survived worse than this. She had survived her father's death when she was 16, leaving her and her mother alone. She had survived her mother's death 2 years later from consumption. She had survived the grinding poverty of mill work in Boston, the loneliness, the constant hunger. She would survive this too. "Then I will move on to a larger town," she said firmly. "Perhaps Cheyenne or Denver, there must be more opportunities there." "That is true," Caleb agreed. "But you have no money for passage, by your own admission, and those cities are not places for a woman alone without resources. You could find yourself in a worse situation than this one." He paused, then leaned forward slightly, his expression serious. "I have a proposition for you, Miss Hartley. Hear me out before you answer." Emma waited, her heart beating faster. She did not know this man, did not know if she could trust him, but she also recognized that she had very few options. "I am not a wealthy man," Caleb began, "but I have a working ranch about 8 miles from here. It is not large, maybe 300 acres, but the land is good and I have a decent herd of cattle. I have been managing alone since my partner died last winter, and it has been harder than I care to admit. I need help, and not just with the heavy work. The house is in poor condition, my cooking is barely edible, and I have let things slide that should not have been neglected." He paused, seeming to choose his next words carefully. "You came here to build a new life. That option may have been taken from you, but perhaps another one has presented itself. I am not proposing marriage, not yet. I am proposing employment. Come to my ranch, keep the house, cook the meals, help with what you can, and I will pay you a fair wage, provide room and board, and give you time to decide what you want your future to be. If after a time we find we suit each other, perhaps we could discuss something more permanent. If not, you will have earned enough money to go wherever you choose." Emma stared at him, trying to read his intentions. His expression was open, honest, without any of the leering calculation she had sometimes seen in the eyes of men who thought a woman alone was easy prey. Still, she had to be careful. "That is a generous offer, Mr. Donovan," she said slowly, "but you must understand my hesitation. I do not know you. How can I be certain of your intentions? How do I know this is not some scheme to take advantage of my circumstances?" Caleb nodded as if he had expected this question. "That is a fair concern. I propose this. Stay here at the hotel tonight at my expense. Tomorrow, come out to the ranch and see it for yourself. Mrs. Fletcher can vouch for my character, as can Reverend Matthews at the church and Sheriff Coleman. I am known in this town, Miss Hartley. My reputation may not be spotless, but I am not a man who would harm a woman or take advantage of someone in need. If you decide the situation does not suit you, I will pay your fare to Cheyenne and give you enough money to survive for a month while you seek employment there. You have my word." Emma studied his face, searching for any sign of deception. She found none. More than that, she saw something in his eyes that called to something in her own heart. A loneliness, a weariness, a hunger for connection that went beyond physical need. This was a man who had lost something just as she had lost so much. Perhaps they could help each other. "Very well," she said at last. "I will come to your ranch tomorrow and see for myself. But I want your promise, Mr. Donovan, that if I say no, you will honor your word about the fare to Cheyenne." "You have it," he said, standing and placing his hat back on his head. "I will come for you at 8 in the morning. That will give you time to rest and tend to your feet. Speaking of which, you should have Mrs. Fletcher look at them. She has some experience with injuries and illness, and from the way you were walking, I would say you need medical attention." Emma felt heat rise to her cheeks. "They are just blisters and calluses. Nothing serious. Miss Hartley, Caleb said, his voice gentle but firm, you walked 40 miles in inadequate shoes. That is not nothing. Please let Mrs. Fletcher help you. Pride is a fine thing, but not when it costs you your health. After he left, Emma sat in the chair for a long time, staring out the window at the dusty street below. The sun was beginning to sink toward the western horizon, painting the sky in shades of gold and orange. She felt unmoored, as if the solid ground of her expectations had turned to water beneath her feet. Gerald Pritchard was dead. Her plan for her future had died with him. But perhaps, just perhaps, something else was being born in its place. Mrs. Fletcher did indeed come to look at Emma's feet, bringing with her a basin of warm water, clean cloths, salve that smelled of herbs, and fresh stockings. When Emma removed her boots and stockings, the older woman drew in a sharp breath. "Lord have mercy, child," Mrs. Fletcher said, kneeling beside the chair. "You have walked yourself nearly to ruin. These need proper care, or they could become infected. For the next hour, Mrs. Fletcher worked on Emma's feet with gentle, capable hands, washing away the dirt and dried blood, applying salve to the blisters and raw patches, and wrapping them in clean bandages. She talked while she worked, filling Emma in on the details of Copper Creek and its inhabitants. "Caleb Donovan is a good man," Mrs. Fletcher said as she worked. "He has had a hard life, lost his family young, but he has never turned bitter. He came to Wyoming about 5 years ago with a man named Thomas Wright. They bought land together and built up that ranch from nothing. When Tom died last winter from pneumonia, Caleb took it hard. He has been working himself to the bone trying to keep the place running alone. I think it is more than the work, though. I think he is lonely and does not quite know how to fix it." "He seems very direct," Emma observed. Mrs. Fletcher laughed. "That he is, no artifice in that man. What you see is what you get, which is rare enough these days. If he says he will do something, he will do it. You can trust his word, Miss Hartley. I would not say that about every man in this territory, but I will say it about Caleb Donovan." That night, lying in the clean bed with her feet propped on a pillow as Mrs. Fletcher had instructed, Emma stared at the ceiling and thought about her choices. She could go to Cheyenne and try to make her way in a city where she knew no one and had no prospects. She could attempt to find work in Copper Creek, though that seemed unlikely given what Caleb had said. Or she could take a chance on a man she had just met, go to his ranch and see what life had to offer there. The old Emma, the girl who had left Boston, would have been terrified of such a risk. But Emma had walked 40 miles on bleeding feet to reach a future that turned out to be a grave in the Wyoming earth. She had learned something about herself during that walk. She was stronger than she had ever imagined, more resilient, more capable of surviving whatever life threw at her. If she could walk 40 miles, she could certainly face whatever awaited her at Caleb Donovan's ranch. When Caleb arrived the next morning, he found Emma dressed in her best dress, a simple gray cotton that she had cleaned as best she could, her hair pinned up neatly, and her bandaged feet in her worn boots. She had eaten breakfast with Mrs. Fletcher in the hotel dining room, and the food had restored some of her strength. She felt ready to face whatever came next. Caleb looked different in the morning light. He had shaved, and his hair was damp as if he had recently bathed. He wore clean clothes and carried himself with the same quiet confidence she had noticed the day before. When he saw her coming down the stairs, something flickered in his eyes, an expression she could not quite read. "Good morning, Miss Hartley," he said, his voice formal but warm. "Are you ready to see the ranch?" "I am, Mr. Donovan." Outside, a wagon waited with 2 horses hitched to it. In the back, Emma could see several crates and bundles that appeared to be supplies. Caleb helped her up onto the seat, his hand strong and warm under her elbow, and then climbed up beside her. He took up the reins, and the wagon began to move, carrying them out of Copper Creek and into the vast expanse of the Wyoming Territory. The landscape was unlike anything Emma had ever seen in Boston. Rolling grasslands stretched in every direction, broken by rocky outcroppings and the occasional stand of trees following a creek or river. The sky seemed enormous, a bowl of brilliant blue that pressed down on the earth with its sheer immensity. In the distance, mountains rose like jagged teeth against the horizon, their peaks still capped with snow despite the summer heat. "It is beautiful," Emma said softly, surprised by how much she meant it. She had expected to find the West harsh and forbidding, and it was those things, but it was also magnificent in a way that took her breath away. "It is that," Caleb agreed. "It is also unforgiving. This land does not care about your plans or your hopes. It simply is, and you either learn to live with it on its own terms or it breaks you." He glanced at her. "You walked 40 miles to get here. That tells me you might have what it takes to survive in this country." They rode in companionable silence for a while, the only sounds the creak of the wagon, the jingle of the harness, and the wind moving through the grass. Emma found herself relaxing, the tension that had gripped her shoulders since leaving Boston beginning to ease. There was something peaceful about this vast openness, something that spoke to a part of her she had not known existed. "Tell me about yourself," Caleb said eventually. "Your letters to Gerald were forwarded to me as his nearest neighbor. I read them so I would know something about you when I met you, but letters only tell so much. Who is Emma Hartley, really?" Emma considered the question. "I am no one remarkable. I was born in Boston, the only child of a shopkeeper and his wife. My father died when I was 16 and my mother followed 2 years later. I worked in a textile mill for 3 years after that, barely earning enough to keep myself housed and fed. One of the other mill girls told me about mail-order brides, about men in the West who were looking for wives. It seemed like a chance for something better, so I answered Gerald Pritchard's advertisement." "That took courage," Caleb said. "Leaving everything you knew to travel across the country to marry a stranger." "Or desperation," Emma replied honestly. "The line between courage and desperation can be very thin when you have nothing to lose." Caleb nodded slowly. "I understand that. I came west for similar reasons. My family died when I was 17. Cholera took my parents and my sister in the span of a week. I had nothing holding me in Missouri, so I drifted west, working whatever jobs I could find until I met Tom Wright in Denver. He had a dream of ranching, and he needed a partner. We shook hands, and that was that. 5 years of hard work, and we had built something worth having." His voice roughened. "Then Tom died, and I was alone again." "I am sorry," Emma said, and meant it. She understood loss, understood the hollow ache that came from being left behind. "Life goes on," Caleb said, but she heard the pain beneath the words. "We do what we have to do to survive, and we hope that someday it becomes more than just survival." The ranch came into view around mid-morning, nestled in a valley between 2 low hills. A creek ran through the property, lined with cottonwood trees that provided some shade. The house was a simple structure made of logs and rough-cut lumber, with a front porch that sagged slightly on one end. Behind it stood a barn in better condition, a corral with several horses and various outbuildings. Cattle grazed in the distance, dark shapes against the golden grass. It was not impressive, Emma thought as they drew closer, but it was honest. This was a working ranch, a place where people labored to wrest a living from the land. There was no pretense here, no false grandeur. Just solid, hard work and the results thereof. Caleb pulled the wagon to a stop in front of the house and climbed down, then came around to help Emma descend. When her feet touched the ground, she felt a twinge of pain but pushed it aside. She could rest later. Right now, she needed to see what she might be committing herself to. "Welcome to the Circle D," Caleb said, gesturing at the ranch. It is not much to look at, but it is mine, and I have put my blood and sweat into every inch of it." He led her into the house, and Emma tried not to let her dismay show on her face. The interior was dark and cluttered, with dirty dishes piled in the kitchen area, clothes strewn over furniture, and dust coating every surface. A stone fireplace dominated one wall of the main room, with a rough table and chairs in front of it. A door led to what she assumed was a bedroom, and a ladder in the corner accessed a loft space above. "I know it is a mess," Caleb said, sounding embarrassed for the first time since she had met him. "I have been focused on the cattle and the land. The house has suffered from neglect." Emma walked through the space slowly, taking it all in. It was a mess, certainly, but underneath the dirt and disorder she could see potential. The structure was sound, the fireplace well-built, the windows adequate to let in light. With cleaning and organization, with curtains and some care, this could be a home. "I have seen worse," she said finally. "Much worse. This is salvageable." Caleb looked relieved. "The bedroom is through there. It was Tom's room, but I have been sleeping in the loft. If you take the position, the bedroom would be yours. You would have privacy and a door you could lock if that made you feel safer." Emma appreciated his thoughtfulness. "Show me the rest." They spent the next hour touring the property. Caleb showed her the barn where 3 horses and a milk cow were stabled. He showed her the chicken coop, currently empty but functional. He showed her the smokehouse, the root cellar, and the workshop where he repaired equipment. He explained the work of the ranch: managing the cattle, maintaining the buildings and fences, breaking horses, and preparing for the brutal Wyoming winter that would arrive in a few months. "I am not asking you to do the heavy ranch work," he emphasized. "That is my responsibility. But if you could manage the house, do the cooking, tend a garden if you are willing, and perhaps help me with the accounts and paperwork, that would free me to focus on what needs doing outside. In exchange, you would have room and board, $30 a month in wages, and the security of knowing you are not alone in this territory." $30 a month was more than Emma had made at the mill. It was fair, even generous for domestic work. But it was not the money that decided her. It was the way Caleb spoke about the ranch, the pride and love evident in his voice. It was the way he had been honest about his needs and his situation. It was the way he looked at her, not with lust or calculation, but with a kind of hopeful respect that touched something deep inside her. "I have one condition," Emma said, stopping to face him. "You said earlier that you were not proposing marriage, not yet. I need to be clear. I will not be coerced or pressured into anything I do not choose freely. If I come here, I am coming as your employee and nothing more unless and until we both decide otherwise. Is that understood?" "It is," Caleb said seriously. "You have my word, Miss Hartley. I will not force anything on you. Whatever happens between us, it will be because we both want it." Emma held out her hand. "Then you have yourself an employee, Mr. Donovan." Caleb took her hand, his grip firm and warm, and shook it solemnly. "Call me Caleb. If we are going to be working together, we should use first names. Then you should call me Emma." They stood there for a moment, hands clasped, and Emma felt a spark of something she could not quite name. It was not love, not yet, but it was the first flutter of possibility, the first hint that perhaps her life might turn out differently than she had imagined. Perhaps it might turn out better. The first week at the Circle D passed in a blur of exhausting work. Emma threw herself into cleaning the house with a determination born of years of making do in difficult circumstances. She scrubbed floors, washed windows, laundered clothes and linens, and organized the chaos into something resembling order. Caleb watched her work with an expression of amazed gratitude, and he helped when he could, though his own duties kept him busy from dawn until well after dusk. Emma discovered that she enjoyed the work in a way she had never enjoyed the mill. Here, she could see the results of her labor immediately: A clean floor stayed clean. A well-cooked meal brought pleasure to the person eating it. A mended shirt could be worn again with pride. There was a satisfaction in domestic work that she had not anticipated, a sense of building something rather than merely surviving. Her feet healed slowly with rest and proper care. Caleb had purchased new boots for her in Copper Creek, sturdy ones made for ranch work, and he had insisted she take time each day to soak her feet in salted water and apply the salve misses. Fletcher had provided. Emma had been touched by his concern, which seemed entirely genuine and without any expectation of reward. They fell into a routine. Caleb rose before dawn to tend to the horses and cattle, and Emma woke shortly after to prepare breakfast. They ate together at the rough table, discussing the day's work over coffee and eggs. Caleb would then disappear for most of the day, working on the endless tasks that kept a ranch functioning, while Emma managed the house and began planning a garden for the space behind the kitchen. They would reunite for dinner, which Emma cooked on the wood stove that she had cleaned and coaxed back into reliable operation. After dinner, they would sit on the porch as the sun set, talking about nothing and everything while the darkness gathered around them. It was during these evening conversations that Emma began to know Caleb as more than just her employer. She learned that he was 28 years old, 3 years older than herself. She learned that he had been educated by his mother, who had been a schoolteacher before her marriage, and that he loved to read but rarely had time for it anymore. She learned that he was lonely in a way that went beyond mere physical isolation, that he hungered for connection and companionship, but did not quite know how to reach for it. "Tom used to say I was too serious," Caleb told her one evening as they watched the stars emerge in the darkening sky. "He said I needed to learn how to laugh more, how to enjoy life instead of just enduring it. I think he was right, but I do not know how to be any different than I am." "I think you are fine as you are," Emma said quietly. "Seriousness is not a flaw. It means you take life seriously, that you care about doing things right. There is nothing wrong with that." Caleb turned to look at her, his gray eyes reflecting the last light of the sunset. "You are easy to talk to, Emma. I have not had that in a long time. Someone I could just talk to without worrying about saying the wrong thing or being judged." "You are easy to talk to as well," Emma admitted. "I was so afraid when I came here. Afraid of Gerald Pritchard, afraid of what he might expect, afraid that I had made a terrible mistake. But you have been kind and respectful, and I am grateful for that." "You should not have to be grateful for being treated decently," Caleb said, a note of anger in his voice that was directed not at her but at the world that had taught her to expect so little. "You deserve to be respected just because you are a person, Emma, not because you work hard or because you are useful, but just because you exist and have worth." Emma felt tears prick her eyes. No one had ever said anything like that to her before. In Boston, she had been just another poor mill girl, faceless and forgettable. Here, sitting on a sagging porch in the middle of nowhere, a cowboy she had known for a week had given her something precious, the acknowledgement of her inherent worth. "Thank you," she whispered. They sat in silence after that, but it was a comfortable silence, full of understanding. 2 weeks into her employment, Emma was in the kitchen preparing bread dough when she heard Caleb call her name urgently from outside. She wiped her hands on her apron and hurried out, her heart pounding. Had something happened? Was he hurt? She found him in the yard, standing beside his horse and looking down at something on the ground. When she drew closer, she saw what had caught his attention. A small dog, a puppy really, with matted fur and ribs showing through its skin. It looked up at them with terrified eyes, too weak even to run. "It must have been abandoned," Caleb said, kneeling slowly so as not to frighten the creature further. "Happens sometimes. People get tired of feeding an animal and just leave it to fend for itself." Emma felt a surge of anger at the cruelty of such an act. She knelt beside Caleb, extending her hand slowly toward the puppy. "Poor thing, it is starving. Can you tend to it?" Caleb asked. "I need to ride out to check the north fence line, but I do not want to just leave it here." "Of course," Emma said. "Go do what you need to do, I will take care of it." After Caleb rode off, Emma gently picked up the puppy, which was too exhausted to resist. She carried it into the house and set it on an old blanket near the fireplace. She warmed some milk, diluted it with water, and patiently coaxed the puppy to drink from a shallow bowl. It took some time, but eventually the little animal began to lap at the liquid, its tail giving a feeble wag. Over the next few days, Emma nursed the puppy back to health. She fed it small amounts of food several times a day, bathed it to remove the mats and dirt from its fur, and gave it a safe place to sleep by the fire. The puppy, which turned out to be a male with mixed breeding that included some herding dog, responded to her care with slavish devotion. He followed her everywhere, his tail wagging constantly, his eyes fixed on her as if she were the center of his universe. "He has claimed you," Caleb observed one evening, watching the puppy curl up on Emma's feet as she sat in her chair. "You are his person now." "I have never had a dog before," Emma said, reaching down to stroke the puppy's soft ears. "We could not afford one in Boston, and the landlord would not have allowed it anyway." "What should I name him?" "That is your choice," Caleb said with a smile. "He is your dog," Emma thought for a moment. "Scout." "I will call him Scout because he found his way to us when he needed help, like a good scout finding his way home." "Scout it is," Caleb agreed. The presence of the dog changed the dynamic of the household in subtle ways. Scout provided companionship during the long hours when Caleb was working outside, and he gave Emma something to care for, something that depended on her and loved her unconditionally. More than that, Scout gave Emma and Caleb something to share, a common responsibility and affection that drew them closer together without either of them quite realizing it was happening. One afternoon in late July, Emma was in the garden she had started behind the house, pulling weeds from around the young vegetable plants she had coaxed from seeds purchased in town. Scout was lying in the shade nearby, watching her work with alert interest. The sun was hot on her back and sweat dampened her dress, but Emma did not mind. She found the work satisfying, the feel of the earth under her hands grounding in a way that nothing in the city had ever been. She heard the sound of hoofbeats and looked up to see two riders approaching the house. Caleb was out checking on the cattle, so Emma stood, brushed the dirt from her hands, and walked around to the front of the house to greet the visitors. Scout trotted at her heels, his ears pricked forward with curiosity. The riders turned out to be men, both rough-looking individuals with hard eyes, and the kind of lean, dangerous look that came from living on the edge of the law. Emma felt a flutter of fear in her stomach, but kept her expression neutral and her posture confident. She had learned early that showing fear to men like these was an invitation for trouble. "Afternoon," the older of the two men said, touching the brim of his hat in a mockery of politeness. "This the Circle D." "It is," Emma replied, staying on the porch where she had the advantage of height. "What is your business here?" "We are looking for work," the man said, his eyes traveling over Emma in a way that made her skin crawl. "Heard this spread might be hiring." "You heard wrong," Emma said firmly. "We are not hiring." The younger man, who had not spoken yet, leaned forward in his saddle. "You the owner, or just the hired help?" "I am the owner's business partner," Emma lied smoothly, gambling that claiming some authority might make them take her more seriously. "And I am telling you we have no work available." "You will need to try elsewhere." The older man's expression hardened. "That is not very neighborly. How about you offer us some water at least? We have been riding all morning." Emma hesitated. The code of hospitality in the West was strong, and refusing even water to travelers could be seen as a serious breach of etiquette. But everything in her screamed that these men meant trouble. Before she could decide, she heard the sound of another horse approaching at a fast pace. Caleb appeared around the side of the house, riding hard, his face set in grim lines. He must have seen the strangers from wherever he had been working and ridden back immediately. He pulled his horse to a stop between Emma and the two riders, positioning himself as a physical barrier. "Gentlemen," he said, his voice cold and hard in a way Emma had never heard before. "State your business or move on." "No need for hostility, friend," the older man said, but his hand had moved closer to the gun at his hip. "We were just asking the lady here about work." "The lady told you there is none," Caleb said flatly. "So you can ride on. The next town is 15 miles east." The two men exchanged glances, some unspoken communication passing between them. Emma held her breath, sensing the situation balanced on a knife's edge. Then the older man shrugged and gathered his reins. "Fair enough," he said. "We will be moving along then. No offense meant." "None taken," Caleb replied, but he did not relax his posture until the two riders had turned their horses and ridden away, heading not east as he had directed but north toward the open range. When they were out of sight, Caleb dismounted and turned to Emma. "Are you all right? Did they threaten you?" "No," Emma said, though her hands were shaking slightly now that the danger had passed. "They were unpleasant, but they did not actually do anything. I told them we were not hiring and they asked for water, but then you arrived." Caleb's expression was troubled. "Those were not men looking for honest work. I recognize the type. Drifters may be worse. I do not like that they came here, and I especially do not like that they saw you alone." He ran a hand through his hair in frustration. "Emma, when I am not here, I need you to keep the rifle by the door loaded and ready. Do you know how to shoot?" "No," Emma admitted. "I have never handled a gun." "Then I will teach you," Caleb said firmly. "Tomorrow we will spend some time on shooting practice. You need to be able to defend yourself if necessary. This is not Boston. Out here, you cannot rely on law enforcement to arrive in time to help if there is trouble." The next morning, true to his word, Caleb brought out his rifle and several boxes of ammunition. He set up targets against a hillside well away from the house and the animals, then spent the next 2 hours teaching Emma the fundamentals of shooting. He showed her how to load and unload the weapon safely, how to hold it properly, how to aim, and how to absorb the recoil when she fired. Emma found the rifle heavy and intimidating at first, but Caleb was patient, positioning her body correctly and talking her through each step. When she finally fired her first shot and actually hit the target, she felt a surge of pride that made her grin. "Good," Caleb said, smiling at her reaction. "Again." By the end of the session, Emma was not an expert marksman, but she was competent enough to hit a target at close range, which was all that mattered for self-defense. Caleb made her practice loading and unloading until she could do it quickly and without fumbling. "Remember," he said seriously as they walked back to the house, "a gun is a tool, but it is a dangerous one. Never point it at anything you do not intend to shoot, and never shoot unless you have no other choice. But if you do have to use it, do not hesitate. Out here, hesitation can be the difference between living and dying." Emma nodded, sobered by his words but also feeling more confident. She had been helpless for so much of her life, dependent on the charity and goodwill of others. Learning to shoot was one more step toward self-sufficiency, toward being someone who could stand on her own feet and protect herself. That evening, as they sat on the porch, Caleb brought up something that had been on his mind. "I have been thinking," he said slowly, "that it might be good for you to meet some of the other people in the area. You have been here 3 weeks now, and you have not really had a chance to socialize or make any friends besides me. There is a barn dance in Copper Creek next Saturday. Would you like to go?" Emma felt a flutter of nervousness mixed with excitement. A barn dance sounded both intimidating and appealing. "Will there be other women there?" "Of course," Caleb said. "The dances are community events. Families come, young and old. It is a chance for people to gather, share news, and have some fun. I think you would enjoy it, and it would be good for folks to meet you properly." "Then yes," Emma decided, "I would like to go." Caleb smiled, a genuine expression of pleasure that transformed his usually serious face. "Good, we will make a day of it. Maybe do some shopping, have a meal at the hotel, then go to the dance in the evening." The prospect of the dance gave Emma something to look forward to as the week progressed. She had one good dress, the blue cotton she had been saving, and she spent an evening altering it to fit better, taking in the waist and letting out the hem slightly. She washed and pressed it carefully, then did the same with Caleb's best shirt and trousers at his bashful request. Saturday arrived with clear skies and moderate temperatures, perfect weather for the journey to town. Emma dressed with care, pinning up her hair in a more elaborate style than she usually wore and allowing herself a moment of vanity to check her reflection in the small mirror in her room. She looked different than she had when she arrived in Wyoming. The sun had given her skin a golden glow despite her bonnet, and the hard work had changed her body, making her stronger and more sure in her movements. But more than the physical changes, there was something in her eyes that had not been there before: confidence, purpose, a sense of belonging. Caleb was waiting by the wagon, and when he saw her, his eyes widened slightly. "You look very nice," he said, his voice a little rough. "Thank you," Emma replied, feeling her cheeks warm. "You look nice as well." He did, she thought. He wore black trousers, a clean white shirt, a vest, and his best hat. He had shaved carefully, and his dark hair was neatly combed. He looked like a man who had made an effort, and Emma found herself noticing details she had tried to ignore before. The breadth of his shoulders, the strength in his hands, the way his eyes crinkled at the corners when he smiled. The ride to Copper Creek was pleasant. They talked easily, with none of the awkwardness Emma might have expected. Caleb told her about the various ranches they passed, pointing out landmarks and sharing bits of local history. Emma found herself laughing at his dry observations about some of the more colorful characters in the area, and she realized with a start that she was happy. Genuinely, deeply happy in a way she had not been since before her parents died. In town, they stopped first at the general store, where Caleb insisted on buying Emma a new pair of gloves and a pretty scarf that she had admired but would never have purchased for herself. Then they went to the hotel for dinner, where Mrs. Fletcher greeted Emma with a warm hug and Caleb with an approving look that made him shift uncomfortably. "It is good to see you both, Mrs. Fletcher said, ushering them to a table by the window. "The whole town has been curious about how things are working out at the Circle D. I have been telling everyone that you are good people who deserve to be left to figure things out in your own time." After dinner, as the sun began to set, they made their way to the barn at the edge of town where the dance was being held. Lanterns had been strung from the rafters, casting a warm glow over the space that had been cleared for dancing. A small group of musicians was setting up in one corner, tuning their fiddle, guitar, and banjo. People milled around, greeting friends and neighbors, the air filled with laughter and conversation. Emma felt a moment of panic as they entered. She did not know how to dance, not the kind of dancing that happened at events like this. In Boston, she had never had the opportunity or the money to attend social gatherings. What if she embarrassed herself? What if people judged her and found her wanting? Caleb seemed to sense her anxiety. He leaned close and said quietly, "Just follow my lead. The dances are not complicated and everyone is here to have fun, not to criticize. You will be fine." He introduced her to people as they approached: ranchers and their wives, shopkeepers, the sheriff, the schoolteacher, and the minister. Everyone was friendly, welcoming Emma with genuine warmth that eased her nervousness. Several of the women made a point of telling her that if she ever needed anything or just wanted company, she should not hesitate to come to town and call on them. When the music started, Caleb led Emma onto the dance floor. The first dance was a simple reel, and he guided her through the steps with patient assurance, his hand warm and steady in hers. Emma stumbled a few times, but Caleb just smiled and adjusted their movements to compensate, and soon she found the rhythm. It was exhilarating, moving to the music, feeling the warmth of Caleb's body close to hers, seeing the approval and enjoyment in his eyes. They danced several dances, and Emma found herself laughing, truly laughing, for the first time in longer than she could remember. Other men asked her to dance, and Caleb graciously stepped aside, though she noticed he watched from the sidelines with an expression she could not quite read. Was it possessiveness, jealousy, or just protective concern? During a break in the dancing, as Emma was catching her breath and sipping punch, a woman about her own age approached. She had auburn hair and green eyes, and she wore a dress that, while simple, was well-made and becoming. "Hello," the woman said with a friendly smile. "I am Alice Brennan. My father owns the general store. I wanted to welcome you properly to Copper Creek." "Emma Hartley," Emma replied, returning the smile. "Thank you. Everyone has been very welcoming." "We are a small community," Alice said. "We take care of our own. I heard you are working out at the Circle D for Caleb Donovan. How are you finding ranch life?" "It is different from what I am used to," Emma admitted, "but I am enjoying it. The work is hard, but it is satisfying in a way my previous employment never was." Alice nodded knowingly. "I understand completely. There is something about building a life out here that cannot be found in the cities. You feel like you are part of something real, something that matters." She paused, then added more quietly, "Caleb is a good man. He has had a rough time since Tom Wright died. It is good to see him smiling again." Emma felt her cheeks warm. "We are just employer and employee. For now, perhaps," Alice said with a knowing smile. "But I have eyes, and I saw the way he looks at you and the way you look at him. Do not be afraid of it, Emma. Love is a rare and precious thing, especially out here. If you find it, hold on to it." Before Emma could respond, Caleb appeared at her elbow. "Would you like to dance again?" he asked, and there was something in his voice, a hint of possessiveness that made Emma's heart beat faster. "Yes," she said, taking his offered hand. This time, the music was slower, a waltz that allowed for closer contact between partners. Caleb placed one hand on Emma's waist and took her other hand in his, pulling her close enough that she could feel the heat of his body. They moved together, and Emma felt something shift between them, something unspoken but undeniable. "Emma," Caleb said softly, his breath stirring the hair near her ear. "I know we agreed this was just employment, and I do not want to pressure you, but I need you to know something." Emma's heart was pounding so hard she was sure he could feel it. "What is that?" "You have changed everything for me. The ranch feels like a home again instead of just a place I work. I look forward to the evenings because I get to talk with you. I wake up in the morning excited for the day because you are part of it." He pulled back slightly to look into her eyes, his expression intense. "I am falling in love with you, Emma. I did not mean to, did not plan for it, but it is happening, and I cannot stop it even if I wanted to. I am not asking you to feel the same way, and I will understand if you want to keep things as they are, but I could not keep pretending that you are just my employee. You are so much more than that to me." Emma felt tears prick her eyes. The honesty in his words, the vulnerability in his expression, touched her deeply. No one had ever spoken to her like this before, with such unguarded emotion. And the truth was, she felt it too. She had been falling for Caleb Donovan since the day she met him, maybe since the moment he had looked at her feet and said, "You walked 40 miles. with such a mixture of amazement and concern. "I am falling in love with you too," she whispered. "I was afraid to admit it, even to myself, but it is true. When I think about my future now, you are in it. The ranch is in it. This life we are building together is in it." Caleb's face transformed with joy. He pulled her closer, right there on the dance floor in front of the whole town, and kissed her gently. It was a kiss of promise, of hope, of two people who had found each other against all odds and were choosing to build something together. When they pulled apart, Emma saw that people were watching, but instead of judgment, she saw smiles and nods of approval. Mrs. Fletcher actually wiped away a tear, and Alice Brennan gave Emma a thumbs-up gesture that made her laugh. They stayed at the dance until late, holding hands, talking with neighbors, and dancing until Emma's feet ached in her new boots. But unlike the pain of her journey to Wyoming, this pain was welcome, a reminder of joy and connection rather than hardship and loneliness. On the ride home under a sky filled with stars, Caleb kept Emma's hand tucked in his, only releasing it when he needed both hands to manage the reins. They talked about the future, about plans for the ranch, about the possibility of expanding the herd, of building a new barn, of all the things they could accomplish together. "I want to marry you," Caleb said as they neared the ranch. "Not right away if you are not ready, but soon. I want you to be my wife, my partner in everything. I want to build a life with you, raise children if we are blessed with them, grow old together watching the sun set over our land." Emma felt happiness bloom in her chest like a flower opening to the sun. "Yes," she said simply. "Yes to all of it. Yes to you, to marriage, to the life we will build together. But can we wait a little while? I want to be sure we are both certain that this is not just loneliness or convenience, but real love." "That is wise," Caleb agreed. "We will wait until fall, give ourselves a few more months to be sure. But Emma, I am already certain. You are the one I have been waiting for, even when I did not know I was waiting." The months between late July and September passed in a blur of work and growing intimacy. Emma and Caleb fell into a deeper relationship, learning each other's quirks and habits, navigating the small conflicts that arose and resolving them with communication and compromise. They kissed often, slow, sweet kisses on the porch in the evenings, and longer, more passionate kisses behind the barn when they could steal a moment alone. But Caleb respected Emma's boundaries, never pushing for more than she was ready to give, content to wait until they were properly married. They set the wedding for the last Saturday in September, giving them time to prepare and for the summer work to be completed. Emma sewed her own wedding dress, a simple but elegant gown of cream-colored cotton with lace at the collar and cuffs that Mrs. Fletcher had gifted her. Caleb repaired the porch, painted the house, and generally made the place as presentable as possible for the small celebration they planned to have after the ceremony. The wedding took place in the small church in Copper Creek, with Reverend Matthews officiating. Emma wore wildflowers in her hair that Caleb had picked for her that morning, and he wore his best suit with a new shirt Emma had made for him. Their vows were simple and heartfelt, promises to love, honor, and cherish each other through whatever trials life might bring. When Reverend Matthews pronounced them husband and wife, and told Caleb he could kiss his bride, Caleb cupped Emma's face in his hands and kissed her with such tenderness that Emma felt tears slide down her cheeks. This was what she had traveled across the country to find, not a stranger she would have to learn to tolerate, but a true partner, a man who loved her and respected her, who saw her as an equal and a treasure. The reception was held at the hotel, with Mrs. Fletcher providing a feast that seemed far too grand for such a small gathering. But the people of Copper Creek had embraced Emma as one of their own, and they turned out in force to celebrate the wedding. There was music and dancing, food and laughter, and a sense of community that warmed Emma's heart. As the evening wore on and the celebration began to wind down, Caleb leaned close to Emma and whispered, "Are you ready to go home, Mrs. Donovan?" Emma thrilled at the sound of her new name. "Yes," she said, "let us go home." The ride back to the ranch was quiet, both of them lost in thought about what awaited them. They had discussed the wedding night in practical terms, both of them inexperienced, but committed to approaching this new aspect of their relationship with patience and care. Emma was nervous but not afraid. She trusted Caleb completely. At the ranch, Caleb helped Emma down from the wagon and then, to her surprise, swept her up in his arms. "I have heard this is traditional," he said with a grin, carrying her over the threshold of the house they would now share fully as husband and wife. Inside, he set her down gently and took both her hands in his. "Emma, I want you to know that we do not have to rush anything tonight. We have the rest of our lives together. Whatever happens, whatever we decide, I just want to be with you." Emma reached up and touched his face, feeling the slight stubble on his jaw. "I want to be with you too, Caleb, fully, completely. I am your wife now, and I want to share everything with you." What followed was gentle and sweet, two people learning each other's bodies with patience and care, discovering together the physical expression of the love they had built through words and actions. There were awkward moments and nervous laughter, but there was also deep tenderness and a sense of rightness that made Emma feel complete in a way she never had before. Afterward, lying in Caleb's arms in the bed that was now theirs, Emma felt a peace settle over her that went soul deep. She had found her place in the world, had found the person she was meant to be with. The journey had been hard, had cost her pain and fear and the death of her original plans, but it had brought her here to this man, to this life, and she would not change any of it. "I love you," she whispered into the darkness. "I love you too," Caleb replied, his arms tightening around her. "My brave Emma, who walked 40 miles to find her future. I promise I will spend the rest of my life making sure you never regret it." The first year of their marriage was one of adjustment and growth. Emma and Caleb worked side by side to build their life together, and the ranch prospered under their combined efforts. Emma's garden produced abundantly, providing fresh vegetables through the summer and fall, and enough preserved food to carry them through the winter. She learned to churn butter, make cheese, and cure meat. She took over the ranch accounts, discovering she had a talent for managing money that allowed them to save a little each month toward future improvements. Caleb taught Emma to ride properly, and true to the words he had spoken to her that first day, he ensured she rode beside him whenever possible. They would take rides across their land together, checking on the cattle, mending fences, and simply enjoying the vast beauty of the Wyoming territory. Emma came to love those rides, the feeling of freedom and partnership they represented. Winter came hard that year, with blizzards that buried the ranch under feet of snow and temperatures that dropped so low that water froze solid in minutes. But the house was warm, the pantry was full, and Emma and Caleb weathered the storms together, spending long evenings by the fire reading, talking, and simply being together. Scout, now fully grown into a loyal herding dog, added to their small family, sleeping at the foot of their bed and following them everywhere during the day. Spring brought renewal and new challenges. Calving season kept them both busy around the clock, and Emma proved her worth as a rancher's wife by working alongside Caleb to help deliver calves and care for the mothers. She was not squeamish about the messy, difficult work, and Caleb's respect for her grew with every challenge she met head-on. In May, Emma realized she was pregnant. She had suspected for a few weeks, but waited to be certain before telling Caleb. When she finally did, on a sunny morning as they were eating breakfast, Caleb's reaction was everything she could have hoped for. He jumped up from the table, swept her into his arms, and spun her around, laughing with pure joy. "A baby," he said, wonder in his voice. We are going to have a baby. In January, I think, Emma said, smiling at his excitement. Are you happy? Happy, Caleb set her down gently as if she were suddenly made of glass. Emma, I am beyond happy. I am terrified and thrilled and grateful and every other emotion all at once. A child, our child. He pulled her close, his hand resting on her still flat stomach. I promise I will be a good father. I will protect you both and provide for you and love you until my last breath. I know you will, Emma said, leaning into his embrace. I never doubted it. The pregnancy progressed smoothly through the summer and fall. Emma continued to work, though Caleb insisted on taking over the heavier tasks and would not let her lift anything he deemed too heavy. Mrs. Fletcher and the other women from town visited regularly, bringing advice, supplies, and companionship. Emma felt embraced by the community in a way she never had in Boston, where neighbors had been strangers who shared walls but never confidences. In November, Caleb hired a young man named Billy Sawyer to help with the ranch work, freeing him to spend more time near the house as Emma's due date approached. Billy was 18, eager to learn, and grateful for the opportunity to work on a good spread with people who treated him fairly. He lived in the small room they had built onto the barn and took his meals with Emma and Caleb, becoming almost like a younger brother to them both. On a cold January night, with snow falling softly outside and the fire roaring in the fireplace, Emma went into labor. Caleb sent Billy racing to town to fetch Mrs. Fletcher, who had agreed to serve as midwife, while he stayed with Emma, holding her hand and trying to hide his fear. The labor was long and difficult, lasting through the night and into the next morning. Caleb stayed by Emma's side the entire time, supporting her, encouraging her, and praying harder than he ever had in his life. When their son finally entered the world with a lusty cry, Caleb wept openly. Mrs. Fletcher cleaned the baby and placed him in Emma's arms, and Emma looked down at the tiny, perfect face of her son with overwhelming love. He had dark hair like Caleb and eyes that she suspected would turn gray like his father's as he grew. He is perfect, Emma whispered, exhausted but radiant. Caleb, we have a son. What should we name him? Caleb asked, touching the baby's tiny hand with one finger. Emma thought of all the people who had brought her to this moment. Her parents who had raised her with love, Tom Wright, who had built this ranch and made it possible for Caleb to have a home, Mrs. Fletcher, and the community who had embraced her, but most of all she thought of Caleb, who had given her everything. Thomas Caleb Donovan, she said. We will call him Tom after your partner who started all of this. Caleb's eyes filled with tears again. He would have been honored, he said softly. Thank you, Emma. The first few months with baby Tom were exhausting but joyful. Emma had never experienced love like what she felt for her son, a fierce, protective love that would have driven her to move mountains for him. Caleb was a devoted father, rising in the night to bring the baby to Emma for feeding, walking the floor with Tom when he was fussy, and staring at him with such wonder that it made Emma's heart ache with happiness. As Tom grew, the ranch continued to thrive. They expanded their herd, built the new barn they had planned, and even added a few more horses to their string. Billy Sawyer proved his worth and became an essential part of their operation. They hired another hand, a Mexican cowboy named Diego Martinez, who taught them all better techniques for working with cattle and horses. When Tom was 2 years old, Emma gave birth to their second child, a daughter they named Rose Sarah after Emma's mother. Rose was as different from Tom as could be, with blonde curls and green eyes that must have come from some ancestor neither Emma nor Caleb knew. Where Tom was serious and observant, Rose was all sunshine and laughter, lighting up every room she entered. The years passed in a rhythm of seasons and growth. They added more children to their family. Another son named James in 1880, and a daughter named Catherine in 1882. The house expanded to accommodate them all, with Caleb and Billy building additional rooms and a larger kitchen. Emma's garden grew to feed not just the family, but also the hands who worked the ranch, and she became known throughout the area for her preserves and baked goods. Tom Wright, the original owner of the land with Caleb, would have been proud of what the Circle D had become. It was more than just a working ranch. It was a home filled with love and laughter, a place where people were valued and treated with respect, where hard work was rewarded, and where the future looked bright. One evening in the summer of 1883, Emma and Caleb sat on the porch they had rebuilt several times over the years, watching their children play in the yard as the sun set. Tom, now 7 years old, was teaching Rose to rope a fence post, while James toddled after them on chubby legs, and Catherine slept in Emma's arms, a tiny bundle wrapped in a soft blanket. "Do you ever think about that day we met?" Caleb asked, reaching over to take Emma's free hand. "How different things could have been if Gerald Pritchard had not died, or if I had not been his neighbor, or if you had decided not to take a chance on a stranger with a failing ranch." Emma smiled, squeezing his hand. "I think about it sometimes, but I also believe things happen the way they were meant to. I was supposed to walk those 40 miles. I was supposed to arrive in Copper Creek with calloused feet and no prospects. And you were supposed to be there, supposed to look at me and see not a burden but a possibility." "You remember that," Caleb said softly, "what I said to you about your feet." "How could I forget?" Emma replied. "You said you walked 40 miles. As if I had done something remarkable instead of something desperate. And later, when you saw how damaged my feet were, you said, 'You will ride beside me now.' Not behind me, not following me, but beside me, as an equal, as a partner. That was the moment I began to fall in love with you, Caleb. That was the moment I began to believe my life might turn out differently than I had feared." Caleb raised her hand to his lips and kissed it gently. "I fell in love with you the moment I saw you standing on that stage platform, covered in dust and exhausted, but still holding yourself with dignity. I fell more in love with you every day after that. Watching you clean that disaster of a house, tend to scout, learn to shoot, dance at that barn dance, give birth to our children, build this life with me. You are the strongest, most remarkable person I have ever known, Emma. I thank God every day that you walked those 40 miles. Emma felt tears prick her eyes, happy tears that seemed to come more easily now than they once had. I love you, Caleb Donovan. I love this life we have built. I love our children and our ranch and this community that has become our home. I would walk 40 miles again, or 400, if it meant ending up here with you. They sat in comfortable silence after that, watching the sky turn from gold to pink to deep purple as the stars began to emerge. Tom eventually tired of roping and came to sit at his father's feet, and Rose climbed into the chair with Emma, careful not to disturb baby Catherine. James fell asleep in the yard, and Caleb gently picked him up and carried him inside to bed. Inside the house, the lamps were lit, casting warm pools of light that pushed back the darkness. The kitchen smelled of the bread Emma had baked that afternoon, and the table was scrubbed clean, ready for tomorrow's breakfast. Upstairs, the children's rooms waited, filled with handmade toys and quilts stitched with love. In the barn, the animals were settled for the night, and the hands were in their quarters, tired from an honest day's work. This was what Emma had traveled across the country to find, though she had not known it when she left Boston. Not just a husband or a home, but a place where she belonged, where she was valued not for what she could do but for who she was. A place where love grew like the crops in her garden, nourished by patience and care, and the simple act of showing up every day ready to do the work. Years continued to pass, each one adding to the story of the Donovan family and the Circle D Ranch. Tom grew into a capable young man who loved the land as much as his father did, and who showed every sign of carrying on the family legacy. Rose developed a talent for working with horses that surpassed even Diego's skill, and she dreamed of one day breeding the finest horses in Wyoming. James was the scholar of the family, always with his nose in a book, and Emma and Caleb began saving money to send him to university in Denver when he was old enough. Catherine was still too young to show where her talents might lie, but she had her mother's determination and her father's steady nature, a combination that would serve her well in life. In 1885, Billy Sawyer married Alice Brennan from the general store, and Caleb helped them buy a small piece of land adjacent to the Circle D where they could start their own ranch. The two families became close, their children growing up together, and the land itself seemed to thrive under the care of people who loved it. Emma never forgot where she had come from or how far she had traveled. She kept her old boots, the ones she had worn on that 40-mile walk from the broken stagecoach to Copper Creek, as a reminder of her journey. Sometimes, when the work was hard or the winter was long, she would look at those boots and remember the woman who had worn them, desperate, afraid, but determined to survive. That woman had walked 40 miles on bleeding feet toward an uncertain future. That woman had found the strength to say yes when opportunity presented itself in the form of a lonely cowboy with a failing ranch. That woman had become Emma Donovan, rancher's wife, mother of 4, pillar of the Copper Creek community, and beloved partner to a man who had kept every promise he ever made to her. Most importantly, she had become a woman who knew her own worth, who understood that she was strong and capable and deserving of love and respect. On their 10th wedding anniversary in September of 1887, Caleb gave Emma a beautiful horse, a mare with a gentle disposition and a smooth gait. The horse was chestnut with a white blaze on her face, and Emma fell in love immediately. "Her name is Lady," Caleb said, helping Emma into the saddle. "Because she is yours, and you are my lady, the finest woman in Wyoming or anywhere else." Emma laughed at his gallantry but felt her heart swell with love. She settled into the saddle, feeling the familiar, wonderful sense of freedom that came from being on horseback. Caleb mounted his own horse, and they rode out together across their land, side by side as they had been from the beginning. As they rode, Emma thought about all the miles she had traveled in her life. The miles of walking the floors of the textile mill in Boston, going nowhere. The miles of that long walk from the broken stagecoach to Copper Creek, each step a prayer for a better future. And now these miles, riding across land that was partly hers, beside a man who loved her, toward a home filled with children and laughter and purpose. "Thank you," she said to Caleb as they paused on a hilltop overlooking the ranch. "For what?" he asked, though his eyes were warm with understanding. "For seeing me," Emma said simply. "For seeing past the dust and the exhaustion and the calloused feet to the person underneath. For offering me not charity but opportunity. For loving me as an equal and a partner. For giving me this life." Caleb reached across the space between their horses and took her hand. "Emma, you gave me this life as much as I gave it to you. You took a broken-down ranch house and turned it into a home. You took a lonely cowboy and gave him a reason to smile. You built all of this with me, not for me. I am the one who should be grateful, and I am, every single day." They sat there for a long moment, hands clasped, looking down at the ranch that represented everything they had built together. The house with its new additions, the barn with its fresh paint, the corrals with horses and cattle, the garden with its neat rows, and the distant figures of their children playing in the yard. This was their legacy, their contribution to the world. A place of love and hard work, of fairness and opportunity, of family and community. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in brilliant colors, they turned their horses and rode home together, side by side as they always would be. Emma's feet no longer hurt from walking, but she would never forget the journey that had brought her here. And every time she mounted her horse and rode beside Caleb across the land they loved, she remembered his words from that first day. "You will ride beside me now." It had been a promise, and he had kept it. Every single day for 10 years, and for all the years to come, she rode beside him, in work, in love, in building a life that mattered. The mail-order bride with calloused feet from walking had become the rancher's wife who rode beside him. And together, they had created something beautiful and lasting in the wild, hard, magnificent land of the Wyoming Territory. As they approached the house, Tom ran out to meet them, followed by Rose, James, and Catherine. Scout barked joyfully, and smoke rose from the chimney, promising warmth and dinner and all the comforts of home. Emma dismounted and gathered her children close, feeling Caleb's arm come around her shoulders, and knew with absolute certainty that she was exactly where she was meant to be. The years would continue to bring challenges. There would be hard winters and dry summers, cattle lost to disease and crops failed by weather, children who grew up and made their own choices, and all the 1,000 difficulties that came with living in a harsh land. But Emma and Caleb would face them all together, side by side, equal partners in every sense of the word. And when their grandchildren asked someday how they had come to build such a wonderful life, Emma would tell them the story of a mail-order bride who walked 40 miles on bleeding feet and a cowboy who said, "You will ride beside me now," and meant it with all his heart. That promise, kept faithfully through all the years of their marriage, was the foundation of everything good in their lives. It was the promise that turned a desperate journey into a love story, that turned 2 lonely people into a family, that turned a failing ranch into a thriving legacy. It was a promise of partnership, of respect, of seeing each other as equally valuable and equally capable. And it was a promise that Emma and Caleb would pass down to their children and their children's children. That love meant standing beside each other, not one above or below the other, but side by side, facing whatever came together. As darkness fell, and the stars emerged in their countless millions across the Wyoming sky, the Donovan family gathered around the dinner table in their warm, cozy home. They held hands, said grace, and began to eat, their laughter and conversation filling the house with life and love. Outside, the wind whispered across the prairie, carrying the sounds of cattle and horses settling for the night, of life continuing in its eternal rhythms. Emma looked around the table at her family, at the home she had helped build, at the life she had never dared to dream possible when she was a poor mill girl in Boston, and she felt complete. She had walked 40 miles to find her future, but she had found so much more than she had sought. She had found herself, her strength, her purpose, and her place in the world. She had found love that was real and deep and lasting. She had found a partner who valued her and respected her and loved her for exactly who she was. And most importantly, she had learned that sometimes the path to happiness is not the one we plan, but the one we walk with courage when our original plans fall apart. She had learned that strength is not just about enduring hardship, but about being willing to accept help and build something new. She had learned that love is not about perfection, but about 2 imperfect people choosing each other every day and working together to create something beautiful. The mail-order bride who had arrived in Copper Creek, with calloused feet from walking, had ridden beside her cowboy into a future brighter than any she could have imagined. And as they sat together at their family table, surrounded by the children they had created and the life they had built, Emma and Caleb knew that every step of the journey, every moment of hardship, every choice that had led them to each other, had been worth it. Their love story was not one of fairy tale magic or love at first sight. It was something better. A love built on mutual respect, on shared work and shared dreams, on the daily choice to stand together and build something lasting. It was a love that had transformed two lost souls into a family, a love that had turned a piece of wild Wyoming land into a home, a love that would endure for the rest of their lives and echo through the generations that followed. As Emma prepared for bed that night, Caleb came up behind her and wrapped his arms around her waist, resting his chin on her shoulder. "Happy anniversary, my love," he whispered. "Happy anniversary," Emma replied, leaning back into his embrace. "To 10 years together and to all the years ahead." "All the years ahead," Caleb agreed, riding side by side no matter what comes. Emma turned in his arms and kissed him, a kiss that held all the love and gratitude and joy of the life they shared. When they finally pulled apart, she smiled up at him and said, "I love you, Caleb Donovan, today, tomorrow, and always." "And I love you, Emma Donovan. My brave, beautiful, remarkable wife who walked 40 miles to find me. I will never stop being grateful that you did." They climbed into bed together, as they had every night for 10 years, and as Caleb blew out the lamp, Emma felt peace settle over her like a warm blanket. Tomorrow would bring new work, new challenges, new joys. The children would need tending, the ranch would need managing, and life would continue in all its beautiful, messy complexity. But tonight, in this moment, everything was perfect. The mail-order bride with calloused feet from walking had found her home, her love, and her purpose. She had found a cowboy who saw her worth and offered her a chance to ride beside him. Together, they had built a life that honored both of them, that gave them each room to grow and thrive, that created space for love to flourish in the harsh but magnificent landscape of the American West. And in the years to come, when people asked about the Donovans and how they had built such a successful ranch and such a strong family, the old-timers would smile and tell the story of Emma and Caleb. They would tell how Emma had walked 40 miles on bleeding feet to reach a future that did not exist, and how Caleb had given her a different future instead. They would tell how two people who had lost everything found each other and built something beautiful from the ashes of their old lives. But most of all, they would tell about the moment when Caleb had seen Emma's damaged feet and said, "You will ride beside me now." Because that moment, that promise, had been the beginning of everything good in their lives. It had been the moment when a desperate journey became a love story, when two broken people became whole, when a mail-order bride with calloused feet became a rancher's wife who rode beside him through all the days of their lives. And they would say, with the wisdom that comes from witnessing true love, that there are few things more powerful than two people who choose to stand side by side, equal partners in building a life together. That kind of love, built on respect and shared work and daily choosing, is the kind that lasts. It is the kind that transforms not just the people involved, but everyone around them. It is the kind that makes the world a better place. Emma and Caleb Donovan lived that kind of love for the rest of their lives, and their children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren would carry that legacy forward, generation after generation, always remembering the story of how it all began, with a mail-order bride who had calloused feet from walking and a cowboy who said, "You will ride beside me now," and meant it with all his heart.